Hello, I'm Greg Fordyce, the owner of An Evening of Old Time Radio YouTube channel. And I've gotten over the past couple of months quite a few comments, quite a few messages asking me, how do you make the videos? How do you get the audio quality of the old time radio shows that you play so high? So I thought I'd throw together this impromptu little video and kind of go into a little detail of how that happens. Uh, Out of every 8, 9 hour video that I make, I used to spend about 4 or 5 hours remastering audio files. So that takes up the bulk of the time. Unfortunately, as you know, if you're an old time radio fan, the original old time radio files are anywhere between 60 and 90 years old. They were originally recorded on wax cylinders or vinyl, or worst case scenario, a listener with a tape recorder placed up against the speaker of a radio. So as you can imagine, the decades have not been kind to these audio files, and the more time that has gone by, the worse they've gotten. A lot of audio files out there that we audiophiles or collectors have gathered have been re-recorded and re-recorded and re-recorded and transferred from one format to another. Every time that happens, each generation, a little bit of quality is lost. So remastering the audio files is about the only way to really bring them up to the standard that I think we all want when we're listening to old time radio shows. So we're going to dive right in, and I'm going to show you how that remastering begins. Okay, so the audio software I use for most of my remastering of old time radio files is free. It's Audacity. Now, I've used quite a few different audio softwares. For music and more complicated edits and mixing, I do use other software, specifically Adobe Audition. But for old time radio, I find that Audacity works great. And of course, it's free, it's open source. So here I bring in the file. In this case, it's Mr. and Mrs. North, October 14th, 1952 episode. And I'm going to play it, and you can hear how this is the original file.
That must be Mrs. Gunther now, Jerry.
I'll answer it then. Well, Mrs. Gunther, Mrs. North and I have been wondering.
Okay, so as you can see, that sounds horrible. Without going into every single detail about how I do this, I'm just going to kind of give you a high-level overview. So as you can see, the waveform, way too low volume-wise. The very first thing I do is I increase the amplification of the audio file to something high enough that I can work with it. Now, 7.024 will bring it all the way up to 0 decibels, which would be way too loud. I always want to stay at least 1 decibel below that. So I'm going to jack it up to 6. Now that's better. But now I can hear it, but we still have all that noise. There's a lot of problems with the dynamics. Listen to that hiss.
That must be Mrs. Gunther now, Jerry.
I'll answer it then.
Okay, so it sounds horrible. The very next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the background noise, or try to. This is a really bad example. I tried to pick a file that has horrible, horrible background noise. You can see it when you zoom in. And in more advanced softwares like Adobe Audition, you can actually go to a spectrograph analysis. Actually, you can on this as well, but it doesn't work as well as I'd like. And you can delve down into the actual, as you can see, you can zoom in about as close as you want. And it'll show the noise as a separate channel. What I'm going to do here is isolate one specific portion of this track that has nothing but noise. So like this section right here. So I'm going to highlight that section. And I go to the noise reduction filter. And I get a profile of that. And now I'm going to select the entire audio file, go back to it. Now, I've done a lot of experimenting on the sensitivity, the frequency smoothing, and the noise reduction in decibels. I find that 14 works pretty well for most. On this one, I probably am going to have to go to 15 actually. And I will leave the sensitivity and the frequency smoothing alone, again, because through my experience, that those are settings that I have that I think work great. It's now processing. As you can see, it brought it down. Now, I'm going to play again. Much reduced.
That must be Mrs. Gunther now, Jerry.
That sounds about a million times better.
Well, Mrs. Gunther, Mrs. Norton, I've been wondering when... Mrs. Gunther?
As you can hear, the noise has now been reduced. It's still there, if you listen closely, just a little bit. But if I cut that out, remember that the noise is also in the spoken parts. So even if I zoom in on a speaking part, like right here, or the music,
Mr. and Mrs. Norton, starring Joseph Curtin and Alice...
the noise is still there, but it's also present throughout the dialogue. By reducing the noise even further, I risk actually harming the dialogue and the music and whatnot. I'm going to leave it as is. The next thing I try to do, and as you can see by reducing the noise, I reduce the overall volume again. So I'm going to take the entire file again and increase the overall volume, probably about 1.5. Another thing I can do is I can place limiters. A limiter takes the high points, such as up here, and reduces them to make sure they're under whatever I set it at. And then the lower ones, such as over here, or zooming in even further, like this section right here, that are very difficult to hear, like this or this, brings those up to whatever I set it at. So by selecting the entire file, as you can see, the first portion of this file is a little low. I'm actually going to raise it up just a tad. So it's a little more in line with the entire overall file. The rest of the file seems to be about right there. And then this portion in the beginning is a little lower. What I'm going to do is select the entire file. I'm going to put a limiter on it. And again, I've already selected the gain, the input gain and the input for right and left channels. Also limit it to, in this case, -4 decibels. And 10.90 hold milliseconds is what I've found works the best for increasing volume on the portions of the audio track that are too low as far as dynamics go, and yet limiting the upper end so they don't blow out your speakers. And then I applied the limiter. As you can see, it capped it right there. And what you're not seeing is if I zoom in, these sections are now a lot louder, the softer ones, whereas the louder portions, such as back here, have now been capped at -4 decibels. Now when I listen to it...
That must be Mrs. Gunther now, Jerry.
I'll answer it then. Well, Mrs. Gunther, Mrs. Norton, I've been wondering when... Mrs. Gunther? Pam, come here. Something's happened to Mrs. Gunther. Zigzag stitch. Now...
Really suspects.
What he suspects and what he can prove are two different things.
So, as you can tell, this is now a lot better in terms of dynamics. The soft portions are not so soft that you can barely hear them, and the loud portions are not so loud that they blow your speakers out. So the limiter has basically been used to finesse the dynamic range, so that the highs are, the loudest portions are a little softer and are limited, and the softer portions are a little louder, so they're not quite so soft that you can barely make them out. At the same time, you still preserve the dynamics. They're still softs and loud, as you can see. This is a little lower volume, this is a little higher volume. But it's not so ridiculously disparate that you have to strain to hear the softer portions. Now, there's still a little bit of noise in there that I'm not 100% happy with. So what I'm going to do is zoom in again to a portion like right here or right here where there's hardly any dialogue and nothing but noise, and I'll see if I can't strip a little more of that out without damaging the actual dialogue in the background.
Like you might wake up your mother. What time is it?
After 11.
Right there. Okay, so right there, nothing but noise. And again, I'm going to try a noise reduction, but this time I'm going to change it to about 13. Hopefully that'll lessen the impact on the actual dialogue and the music and the other sounds that are also being impacted by the noise reduction. Whoops. My bad. So I get my profile for that section, and I'm going to apply it against the entire file. And let's see what happens. You're going to notice these going down. Okay. Let's zoom out. Lost a little bit of volume, but that's okay. Now let's try it again.
And the people.
See, that's what
don't work. Everybody in the neighborhood, they know.
Okay.
Then
That's what I was afraid would happen. So now, by applying more noise reduction to the already reduced audio file, now it's impacting the actual other sounds in the file. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to try it again. This time, I'll try like 9. Hopefully it won't have quite the same impact. Let's see how it sounds now.
Daniel,
he already suspects.
what he suspects and what he can prove are two different things.
Okay, that's a little better. I'm going to try one more time, only this time I'm going to try 6. All right, still some noise, as you can see from the 2 different lines, but...
Lois.
Yeah?
Lois, I can't go through with it.
Dad.
I can't.
For heaven's sake, Dad, get hold of yourself. Mother will hear you.
I don't care.
Oh, I do.
Please, Lois, please. I've thought it all out. I want to go to the district.
And to the penitentiary, too?
No, but...
What? What do you think the district attorney will do when we tell him why?
All right, so that's quite a bit of an improvement. I'm going to undo that, play it.
No, but... What? What do you think the district attorney will do when we tell him why you held out against convicting Nick Daniel?
You already the only man on that jury that voted for acquittal.
Okay, you can still hear quite a bit of noise. So when I reapply the noise reduction at 6, you're going to notice that the noise is quite a bit reduced, and the audio quality of the audio is still acceptable, at least in my opinion.
Why I was the only man on that jury that voted for acquittal.
Oh yeah, much
Your
reduced.
mother. I think she knows too. Oh, why did I do it? Why?
For $10,000, that's why.
I shouldn't have listened to you.
Okay, so I'm happy with the amount of noise reduction. The original file had a ton. There's still a little tiny bit. If we play this section here, you can see this is nothing but noise. Just a little bit, not a lot. But yet the dialogue is now cleaner.
I shouldn't have listened to you. I've let you have your own way all your life.
Stop it, Dad, stop it.
For once I should have said no to you.
Stop it.
All right, so I'm happy with the general audio quality. And we've got the dynamic levels capped so they're not too loud, and we've increased them through the limiter so that the softest parts are not inaudible. The last part I do is I go through and I find commercials, and I delete those because, I mean, in some cases I'll leave commercials in. Sometimes I think it kind of adds to the nostalgic quality of an old radio show, but generally speaking, I try to delete the commercials. Especially if, of course, there's cigarette commercials, as YouTube does not allow cigarettes or drugs or violence or sex or that kind of thing. I also try to trim the front and of the audio file. For instance, here in the beginning, a lot of dead air there. Don't need all that, so I cut that out. Go to the end. And usually there's a station identification or news or something at the end that doesn't need to be there. So we play that and find it and cut it
Hollywood
out.
28. Remember, there's an Adler to fit every home and every pocketbook. If you like to sew, you deserve an Adler.
Okay, I don't need to hear all this. It looks like the show ends right here. It would be my guess.
But I can get both sides of the page.
Yep. Okay, so the show ends right here. The rest of it is just commercials and nonsense that we don't need to hear. So I cut that out. Delete the unnecessary. A little too much blankness there. Delete that. And then what I usually like to do is fade it out. So I'll take the last portion of it and fade it out. So it sounds like this. And the beginning starts almost immediately. So after trimming, doing fade-ins, fade-outs, going through and removing commercials, which is next, Usually at about the 10-minute point.
Well, it appears that Lois Gunther has stopped asking for trouble
Sewing machine, it's easy with an Adler.
and is prepared to start giving some.
Sewing's a joy.
Okay, so your commercial begins right here. And where does it go to?
All on the Adler without touching a single attachment. You'll be delighted at the ease under at your nearest to Mr. and Mrs. Norton.
When I tried to stop her,
Okay, so it comes right back in here. So I basically take the section with commercial, I cut that, and I zoom in to make sure that I've done a clean cut and there's no blank space.
Stopped asking for trouble and is prepared to start giving some.
when I tried to stop her, Dad made me let her go.
There we go. So we've eliminated the commercial there. I think there might be another one. Let me check. Usually would be at about the somewhere around the 20-minute mark.
What? No, she's dead. Murdered. I think there's a connection, though. This place on Grimley Square, we could...
I don't know what you're talking about. Now look, you crazy.
look, Mr. This time, Herbert Gunther found Nick Daniels guilty.
Here's another one.
Sewing's a joy with an Adler sewing machine.
Yes, you'll sing a happy on the Adler sewing machine. And now, back to Mr. and Mrs. Norton.
Okay, so here's the end of the commercial. Here's the beginning. I cut that out. Looks like that's a little harsh, so I'm going to improve the fade in on that one. Cut just a little bit of this out, and let's see how this sounds now. Could be a little cleaner. There's a little bit of noise in there. I'm going to go like this. Drop the volume down to almost 0. Do a fade in on this. And a fade out on this. Now how does it sound? There, that's better.
Give me that gun, Gunther.
All right, so I think that is all I'm going to need to do with this particular file. The noise has been almost completely eliminated. There's still a little bit, but I can't remove that without damaging the actual dialogue and music. The dynamics have been leveled out and improved upon. The max volume has been limited so that it doesn't blow the speakers out. The intros and outros have been trimmed. Commercials have been removed. And I'll put them side by side so you can hear the difference. So we'll mute this and play the original.
That must be Mrs. Gunther now, Jerry.
I'll answer then. Well, Mrs. Gunther, Mrs. Norton, I've been wondering what... Mrs. Gunther?
All right. And here is the remastered file.
That must be Mrs. Gunther now, Jerry.
I'll answer then. Well, Mrs. Gunther, Mrs. Norton, I've been wondering what... Mrs. Gunther? Pam, come here.
Okay, so quite a difference. And you can see it's also quite a bit shorter since I trimmed the commercials and the beginning and the end of the file as well. So that is basically, in a nutshell, how I remaster old-time radio audio files to get them up to standards that I feel are good enough to put in the video and make it so that people that are listening to these old-time radio shows can actually hear them and appreciate them in a way that they wouldn't be able to do if they were listening to this lousy version here, which just sounds horrible. So that's basically it in a nutshell, and I do that for basically every file that is in my videos. Now, some obviously are better quality than others. This one was a pretty poor example of a really bad audio file that needs a lot of work. Other ones take less time. A good example would be CBS Radio Mystery Theater. Those generally are really high audio quality. I mean, they still need to be tweaked a little bit. Usually they need a little bit of noise reduction. They need commercials trimmed. Maybe a little bit of audio, or excuse me, volume adjustment. But generally speaking, they're in pretty good shape. And generally speaking, the older the file, the lousier quality it is. Although there are some exceptions. There are some escape and suspense shows that sound amazing considering how many years have gone by, that don't require that much tweaking. But generally speaking, I have to spend, like I said, probably around 5 hours for every 8 or 9 hour video that I put out, just remastering audio files and bringing them up to a constant standard. Another thing that is done frequently in the remastering process on audio files is EQ adjustments. So your mids, your lows, and your highs, bass, treble, etc. Some files, through the course of time, have just gotten so bad that they're either way too bassy and you can't even understand what's being said. It sounds like the audio is coming through like a tunnel buried in the earth, or they're so tinny that it just sounds ridiculous, and it's very difficult to understand the dialogue. So now that doesn't happen a lot. Most audio files, I really don't need to mess with the EQ too much. I might tweak the mids, tweak the bass, tweak the highs a little bit, but generally speaking, the other steps that I've already showed you are pretty much what needs to be done. Now, this is an example of a file that has too much bass. This would be Spycatcher, and this is the November 16th, 1960 episode. I will start by playing you just a little bit, and you can get an idea of the EQ problems.
Spycatcher. A series of true stories of the unceasing search for enemy spies in war.
Okay. Now, I've already taken care of the noise issues and the dynamic issues on this. I've just simply left the EQ as it originally was for you to hear the difference. You can hear there's a lot of bass in this, especially right here. We're just going to focus on this one section right here.
A series of true stories.
Way too much bass. To give you an idea what is done to clean up the EQ problems, in this case too much bass, there's many different options. You can go to your equalizer. The equalizer actually has a whole bunch of, as you can see, channels that you can mess with just like you can on any equalizer. And again, Audacity, for free software, has a pretty robust engine in it. I don't usually mess with this detail of an EQ. Now again, if I was doing music or something like that, sure, I'd want to get this granular. But when it comes to old-time radio files, they are so basically two-dimensional that I don't really need to get into that depth. So I can pretty much go with just bass and treble, a much simpler control. In this case, there's far too much bass. So I'm going to take some of the bass out, and I'm going to add just a touch of treble, and I'm not going to mess with the volume output at all. So this is what it's going to start. This is what it's going to sound like now that I have adjusted these two sliders.
A series of true stories of the unceasing search for enemy spies in war.
Okay, so as you can see, the bass is much reduced, slightly more treble, and you can just keep tweaking it.
Based on the memoirs of Lieutenant
That's
Colonel
way too much.
Pinto of the Allied Counterintelligence Service. This week's story is entitled Never Say Die. The part of Colonel Pinto is played by Bernard Archer.
So you can see,
A series of
from me messing with the sliders, the kind of sound. Fortunately, you can play it back in real time and actually hear how your adjustments are impacting the audio in real time. So I'll kind of mess with those sliders.
True stories of the unceasing
Reducing the
search
bass.
for enemy spies in war.
Increasing the
Based
bass,
on the memoirs of Lieutenant Colonel Oreste Pinto of the Allied Counterintelligence
and the same with treble, increasing the treble,
This week's story is entitled Never Say Die.
reducing the treble.
The part of Colonel Pinto is played by Bernard Archer.
I basically tweak it until I'm happy with it.
A series of true stories of the unceasing search for enemy spies in war. Based on the memoirs of Lieutenant Colonel Oreste Pinto of the Allied Counterintelligence Service. This week's story is entitled Never Say Die. The part of Colonel Pinto is played by Bernard Archer.
I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to apply that. Now we go back.
Pie catcher.
This section here I have already adjusted.
A series of true stories of the unceasing search for enemy spies in water, based on the memoirs of Lieutenant Colonel Arrested Pinto of the Allied Counterintelligence Service.
And this is where it was not adjusted. This is the original EQ.
It began late in December 1944.
You can tell the difference.
My headquarters were at Eindhoven in the South of Holland.
Very bassy, difficult to understand, as opposed to this, which has now been adjusted.
For enemy spies in water, based on the memoirs of Lieutenant Colonel Arrested Pinto of the Allied Counterintelligence Service.
So, a big improvement. So, occasionally I do have to mess with the EQ, and of course if I wanted to apply it to the entire file, I could do that. Or, I don't usually do that, however, because in most cases, audio files are not uniformly impacted in one way, shape, or form. You have to go through and basically every speaker, female voices, for instance, might have less bass adjustment needed, as opposed to a male with a deeper voice will need more bass adjustment. And again, with treble and mids as well. So really, EQ adjustment takes probably the most time, because you're going to have to go through the entire file.
I want to know why.
All right. You want to know why? All right.
Okay, those two male voices will probably each require a different bass adjustment. If there's a female voice in it,
You're an important person. 4 years, much too long.
okay, well, there's a man with a little higher voice, so that might require a little mid adjustment, perhaps a little more treble adjustment, and less bass adjustment, and so on and so forth. Going through the entire file
In my opinion,
and isolating certain segments of dialogue, or in some cases music, and then making the appropriate treble, bass, or mid adjustments to that particular voice or that particular audio segment. So that is how EQ is adjusted and improved upon using the simple bass treble interface. And again, if I absolutely have to, I can always go to the graphic EQ. The graphic EQ, and I can really get granular about tweaking it. Although that's a lot more complicated, and again, not necessary for old-time radio shows, in my opinion. So there you go. That is remastering old audio files in a nutshell. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you found it a little informative. And I hope it goes a long way towards explaining the amount of work that goes into making these videos. Most of it being, again, remastering the audio. As far as the direction of the channel, I'll touch on that briefly. As you know, right now I'm doing one video a week and usually one live stream every week. And it's my hope to increase that to 2 videos a week and 2 live streams a week, maybe more. I'm thinking towards the end of the summer, when I have a little more time. I do have a full-time job, but I'm hoping to get a little more content out there for you beginning in the next month or 2. And I want to also take a moment just to thank all of you. This channel only started a few months ago. Obviously, I'm not on the same level yet as Dino, who's the king of YouTube old-time radio. Not that it's a competition. He puts out some amazing content. But it is my goal to also put out great content for you guys. And judging by the comments and the messages and the views, you obviously like old-time radio as much as I do, and it's my goal to continue to produce really high-quality audio for you guys on a regular basis, and a lot more of it. And I wanted to thank all of you very much for continuing to tune into the channel and watch the videos and tune into the live streams. It means the world to me. As you know, YouTube will not monetize this channel. YouTube will not monetize any old-time radio YouTube channel, for the simple fact that we are not producing original material. We are producing basically rebroadcasts of original material that was created decades ago by very talented people. And even though we put a lot of work into making these videos and remastering the audio files, as you saw, YouTube does not feel that rises to the level of originality that can be monetized. If you do wish to support the channel, of course, in the show description pages, you can find a donate button. You can support us on Patreon, etc. But I don't do this for money. I do this for the enjoyment of making the videos and putting out high quality old-time radio shows for you old-time radio fans, of which I am also one. That's what gives me the satisfaction. If you weren't watching, I wouldn't be doing it. But I want to give you all a really big thank you for watching and for commenting and for liking and for subscribing and for continuing to tune in every time a video or a live stream comes out. It really means the world to me, and it makes it all worthwhile. So I hope you found this informative, and I will see you all on the next live stream. Thanks very much again for watching.